Hey there! Welcome to Lurkbound. I'm so glad you're here. There's something about the quiet parts of the world, the places people don't usually look, that holds the most chilling secrets. Tonight, I've put together a collection of true accounts that prove sometimes the things we fear aren't just in our heads. They're out there, waiting in the silence. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel, so definitely let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you're a fan of these kinds of stories, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what I do here. Now, make sure your doors are locked, settle in, and let's see what's lurking in the dark. I had just gotten home from the gym on a quiet morning, the kind of morning where everything seems calm and routine. My wife was in a hurry to leave for work. She barely had time to drop her bag, give me a quick kiss goodbye, and rush out the door. I waved, smiling, assuming she'd be back later in the day, and headed straight to the bathroom to shower. It was one of those showers where you try to just relax, let the water hit your shoulders and wash away the stress, the kind that makes you feel like you're shedding not just sweat, but the tension of the day. I was halfway through, lathering shampoo into my hair, letting the warmth of the water wash over me, and thinking about breakfast, my workout, and maybe a quick scroll through my phone after I got out, when suddenly the bathroom door creaked open. My first thought was simple. My wife must have forgotten something. Maybe her phone, a jacket, or the coffee she swore she couldn't live without before heading out. I didn't panic. I just called out, "What's up?" expecting a familiar, cheerful response. The reply that came back made my blood run cold. It wasn't her. It was a man's voice, a voice that I didn't recognize, deep and unfamiliar, echoing slightly in the tile-filled bathroom. In that instant, something primal took over. My heart slammed in my chest, adrenaline shot through every nerve ending, and before I even had a chance to think, my body acted on pure instinct. I screamed. I'm not proud of it, but it was the kind of scream that came from pure or unfiltered terror. The kind of scream you imagine a little kid letting out in the middle of the night when they think a monster is in the closet. Then, without even realizing what I was doing, I leapt from the shower. The curtain rod came with me, bending under the force, the shower head spraying cold water across the bathroom in every direction. I slipped and skidded across the wet floor, the tiles slick under my bare feet, my hands flailing to grab something, anything, to defend myself. By some miracle, or maybe pure instinct, I collided with the man. Our bodies tumbled together in a chaotic, messy tangle, slipping and sliding across the soaked floor. I swung a fist in desperation, and one clean hit connected with his head. Immediately he started bawling, loudly, full-on, uncontrollable crying that made the already chaotic scene even more surreal. For a moment, everything froze. Water was running everywhere, steam filled the room, and we were both on the slippery tiles, my heart still hammering as I tried to figure out what had just happened. It was only when I started to calm down that I realized who it was. It was the teenager from a few doors down, a young man with intellectual disabilities who had been going through a phase of exploring and opening unlocked doors in the neighborhood. He wasn't dangerous in any criminal sense. He was just a kid who didn't always understand boundaries. That realization didn't immediately stop my pulse from racing, but it made me begin to see the scene with a different perspective. I turned off the shower, still dripping wet, and carefully disentangled myself from him. My bare feet slipped a few more times before I managed to get my balance and step away. My bathroom looked like a hurricane had passed through. Water pooled across the floor, towels tossed everywhere, the shower rod bent and hanging lopsided, and the shower head still spitting water into the room. I felt a strange mix of relief and embarrassment, knowing that my reaction, though instinctual, had completely ruined the bathroom. I quickly pulled on a pair of sweatpants, grabbing a towel to mop up some of the water, and then guided the boy carefully out the door. His tears were still flowing, and he kept trying to explain himself between sobs. I listened as best I could, my own heart slowly calming. He told me that he had just wandered in because our garage door had been left open, and that he hadn't meant to scare anyone. His parents had noticed his phase of going into unlocked houses, and apparently they had been trying to teach him boundaries, though clearly it hadn't been fully effective yet. Once we were outside, I walked him back to his home. I kept a careful eye on him the whole way, partly because I didn't want him to trip or fall in the wet grass, and partly because I was still shaken from the chaos in my own house. It was hard not to replay the scene in my mind, the scream, the tangle, the fear that had overtaken every instinct in my body. My mind kept thinking about how it could have gone worse, how the situation might have escalated if he had panicked or if I had misjudged him completely. After dropping him off, I went back home to survey the damage. Water was everywhere. Towels were soaked, the floor had puddles in every corner, and the shower curtain was half off the rod. I ran my hands over the tiles, trying to make sense of the mess and calm down my own racing thoughts. That's when my wife came home, her expression a mix of surprise and confusion as she took in the chaos. I explained what had happened, the way it had unfolded so quickly, and she could hardly believe it. She looked at me, eyes wide, as if trying to decide whether to be angry or laugh, but mostly she just shook her head. Eventually the police got called, not because there was any real danger at that point, but because of the punch I had thrown. The neighborhood had its own rules, and the parents of the boy were concerned, understandably so, about the incident. I tried to explain that it had been self-defense, that I had no idea it was him when I leapt from the shower, but they still had to go through the motions of reporting it. The paperwork, the questions, the awkward recounting of the story, it all felt surreal, like some bizarre dream. In the days that followed, I kept thinking about how quickly a normal morning could spiral into total chaos. One small oversight, like leaving a garage door unlocked, had turned into an all-out, full-blown panic moment. I thought about how adrenaline takes over, how your brain decides the world is ending in milliseconds, and how your body reacts before your mind can even catch up. I also thought about how lucky it was that no one was seriously hurt, and that the teenager was just a kid with no malicious intent. The memory stayed with me for years. Every time I walked into the bathroom or left the garage door open, I could feel a faint chill remembering that morning. The story became a sort of cautionary tale for friends and family. Never underestimate how fast things can go wrong. Never assume safety, and never forget how unpredictable life can be when fear and adrenaline take over. Even now, when I retell it, I can still hear the sound of the bathroom tiles slipping under my feet, the wail of the boy, the water spraying in every direction, and the way my heart seemed to pound like a drum out of control. That morning taught me something about myself, about instincts, and about the unexpected ways life tests patience, composure, and quick thinking. I learned to always double-check doors, to remain aware of the environment, and to appreciate just how chaotic even a simple, ordinary moment can become. I also learned that sometimes the best way to get through a terrifying situation is to act, or even if it's messy, and to deal with the consequences afterward. Even today, years later, that bathroom is a story in itself. The shower rod may have been replaced, the floor dried and cleaned countless times, and the chaos long since put behind me. But the memory of the panic, fear, adrenaline, and relief is still vivid. I can still imagine the terror of thinking there's an intruder in your home while you're vulnerable, the chaos of water and bodies tangling together, and the surreal moment when it all makes sense. It's a story I will never forget, and a story I tell with both a shiver and a laugh, because it perfectly captures how quickly the ordinary can turn extraordinary and how life has a way of surprising you in the most unpredictable ways. I was sitting on the couch that evening, doing nothing special, just watching TV the way I usually did after a long day. The house was quiet in that familiar, comfortable way, the kind of quiet you don't really notice because you're used to it. The TV was on low volume, more background noise than anything else, and I was half paying attention, half lost in my own thoughts. Everything felt normal, safe, ordinary. Then I heard the back door open. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just the normal sound of the door unlocking and opening, the exact same sound I'd heard thousands of times before. I didn't jump or feel scared because there was no reason to. My dad usually came home around that time, almost like clockwork. My body and brain recognized the sound instantly, and I didn't even bother turning my head to look. I just assumed it was him, like always. A second later, I heard footsteps. They were slow and steady, heavy in the way adult footsteps are, moving across the floor from the back entrance toward the hallway that led to his room. Again, completely normal, familiar. I could almost picture him in my head without seeing him. Maybe tired from work, maybe thinking about dinner, maybe heading straight to his room to sit down and relax. I stayed on the couch, eyes on the TV, relaxed, not even slightly concerned. The footsteps continued for a few seconds, then suddenly stopped. At first, I didn't think much of it. Sometimes he paused to take his shoes off, or to grab something, or just to stand there for a second. But as time passed, something felt off. I didn't hear him sit down. I didn't hear his bedroom door open or close. There was no sound at all, just silence. Not normal silence, not the quiet background hum of a house at night. This was a sudden, heavy quiet, like something had been cut off mid-motion. I remember sitting there, staring at the TV, and realizing that I was listening now, actively listening, waiting for another sound that never came. A few seconds passed, then a few more. I told myself I was overthinking it, that he was probably just standing there, maybe checking his phone, maybe distracted. But that explanation didn't sit right. My dad wasn't the type to just stop moving in the hallway and stand there in complete silence. And even if he did, I would have heard something. A shift of weight, a sigh, fabric moving, anything. But there was nothing. The house felt different all of a sudden. Not scary exactly, but wrong, like a puzzle piece that didn't fit. I muted the TV. The silence became even louder. I sat there for a moment, debating with myself. I didn't want to jump to conclusions or freak myself out for no reason. At the same time, I felt this growing sense of unease, like my body knew something wasn't right. Before my brain fully caught up, I finally stood up. I remember moving slowly, almost cautiously, even though I couldn't explain why. I walked toward the hallway, telling myself that maybe my dad wasn't feeling well. Maybe he felt dizzy. Maybe he'd stopped because something was wrong and he needed help. That thought gave me a reason to keep moving forward instead of freezing in place. As I reached the hallway, I looked toward his room. It was empty. No light, no movement, no sound. My heart started beating faster. I walked a little farther, checking the doorway, then the bathroom. Then the rest of the hall. Nothing. No sign that anyone had come inside at all. The back door was closed, just like it always was after someone came in, but everything else felt untouched, unchanged. I stood there, confused, my mind racing. I knew what I had heard. I knew I'd heard the door open. I knew I'd heard footsteps, clear as day. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't the TV. It wasn't a creak or random house noise. It had sounded exactly like my dad coming home. And yet, there was no one there. I remember feeling this strange mix of confusion and disbelief. I kept replaying the sounds in my head, trying to make sense of them. Maybe I'd mistaken another noise for footsteps. Maybe something outside had sounded like the door. But the more I thought about it, the less sense those explanations made. I stood there for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only a minute or two, just staring down the hallway, my brain struggling to catch up with what was happening. Then, suddenly, I heard the back door open again. This time, I jumped. I turned around quickly, my heart pounding, and watched as my dad actually walked into the house. I could see him clearly now. Same clothes, same posture, same tired expression he always had when he came home. He looked at me, standing there in the hallway, and frowned slightly. "Why are you just standing there?" he asked. I couldn't answer right away. I must have looked completely lost, because he gave me this confused look, like he was trying to figure out what was wrong with me. "You just came in," I finally said, my voice sounding shaky even to my own ears. He shook his head. "No, I didn't. I just got here." My stomach dropped. I tried to explain what I'd heard. The door, the footsteps, the way they'd gone toward his room and then stopped. He listened, but I could tell he didn't really know what to make of it. He didn't brush me off, but he didn't have an explanation either. The rest of the night felt strange. Nothing else happened. No more sounds. No movement. Everything went back to normal on the surface, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been wrong, that something had happened that didn't have a clear explanation. I kept replaying it over and over in my mind, wondering how I could have heard something so real that wasn't actually happening. Even now, when I think about it, what unsettles me the most isn't fear. It's certainty. I know what I heard. I know how real it felt. The timing, the sounds, the way my brain immediately accepted it as normal without question. It wasn't dramatic or obvious or something that screamed danger. That almost makes it worse. It slipped into my reality so easily, blending in with routine and familiarity, that I didn't question it until it stopped making sense. Sometimes I think about how easily I could have ignored it completely. If I hadn't gotten up, if I hadn't gone to check, I might have just assumed my dad was in his room the whole time. I might never have realized that something was off at all. To this day, I don't have an explanation that fully satisfies me. I've heard people talk about houses making noises, about brains filling in gaps, about false memories or misinterpreted sounds. Maybe it was something like that. Maybe there's a logical explanation I'll never think of. But that moment, standing in the hallway, realizing no one was there when someone should have been, is burned into my memory. The quiet, the confusion, the way reality seemed to slip for just a second. It wasn't supernatural, it wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to make me question how much we really notice and how much we just assume is normal because it always has been. And every time I hear the back door open now, even years later, I always look up just to be sure. I was 17 at the time, and I had agreed to dog sit for my neighbors while they were away. They were going out of town for a few days and didn't want their dog to be alone overnight, so they asked me to stay in their house instead of just stopping by during the day. I said yes, without thinking much about it. I had been to their house plenty of times before, and nothing about it ever felt strange or scary when other people were around. It was just a normal house in a normal neighborhood. The only thing about that house, though, was that it creaked constantly. The floors, the walls, the stairs, even the deck outside made noise. It was one of those older houses where every little shift in temperature or movement caused a sound. During the day, it was barely noticeable. At night, when everything else was quiet, it sounded like the house itself was alive. That night, I was completely alone. The neighbors were gone, the dog was asleep, and I was sitting on the couch in the living room around 11 at night. The lights were dim, the TV was on, and I was trying to relax, but there was this constant feeling in the back of my mind that I didn't belong there. Sleeping in someone else's house is always a little uncomfortable, especially when you're a teenager and you're used to the sounds and layout of your own home. I was watching TV, half paying attention, when I heard a creaking sound that felt different from the rest. At first I brushed it off. That house always made noise, and I had already heard plenty of random pops and groans throughout the evening. Still, this one made my stomach tighten a little. It sounded like footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone walking up the stairs on the back deck. I paused the TV and listened. The house was silent again. I told myself I was being paranoid. I reminded myself that I was alone, it was late, and my brain was probably just filling in gaps. I turned the TV back on and tried to focus on what I was watching, but my attention kept drifting back to the back door. A few minutes passed, and then I heard it again. Another creak, then another. This time, it was unmistakable. It really did sound like someone was moving outside. My heart started beating faster, and my hands felt slightly shaky. I sat there frozen, staring toward the dark kitchen area that led to the back door. I kept telling myself it was nothing. Maybe the dog shifted in his sleep. Maybe the wind moved the deck. Maybe the house was settling. I tried to rationalize it, but the fear was already there, creeping in quietly and taking control. Then it happened. I glanced toward the back door, and my entire body locked up. Standing outside, pressed close to the glass, were two men. They were completely still. They were wearing saw masks, the kind with the pale face, red spirals on the cheeks, and that twisted, frozen smile. They were staring directly at me through the glass. For a second, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It didn't feel real. It felt like a scene from a horror movie, like my mind had finally snapped under the pressure of being alone in a creaky house at night. Then the fear hit me all at once. My heart slammed into my chest so hard it felt painful. My vision narrowed. I couldn't hear the TV anymore. All I could see were those masks, motionless, watching me. I didn't scream. I didn't run immediately. I just stared, completely frozen, as adrenaline flooded my body. Then instinct took over. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was off the couch and moving. I ran straight into the kitchen, my breathing fast and shallow, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control them. I grabbed the first thing that felt like it could protect me, which happened to be a knife from the counter. I held it tightly, my knuckles white, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it was echoing in my ears. My thoughts were racing. Who were they? How did they know I was alone? Were they about to break in? Was I about to die in my neighbor's house while dog sitting? Every worst-case scenario rushed through my mind at once. I remember thinking about my parents, about how stupid it was that I agreed to stay there, about how unreal the whole situation felt. I stood there in the kitchen, knife in hand, staring toward the back door, waiting for something to happen. I expected the door handle to move. I expected glass to shatter. I expected them to start banging on the door. Instead, I heard laughter, not the kind of laughter that brings relief right away, but loud, careless laughter that made no sense in that moment. It took a few seconds for my brain to catch up. Then, one of the masked figures pulled the mask off his face. It was my brother. The other one followed, revealing his friend. They were both about 20 years old, laughing so hard they could barely stand straight. My brother was holding his stomach, tears in his eyes, clearly proud of himself for what he had just done. I didn't feel relief right away. I felt rage, pure, shaking rage mixed with leftover fear. My hands were still trembling, and I was still gripping the knife when I realized what had happened. They had decided it would be funny to scare me while I was alone, late at night, in someone else's house. I yelled at them to get inside and stop messing around. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, higher and shakier than usual. When they came in, they were still laughing, still making jokes, still acting like it was the funniest thing in the world. They told me they thought I'd just scream or run, that they didn't expect me to grab a knife. That only made it worse. It hit me how easily the situation could have gone very wrong. If I had panicked more, if they had moved suddenly, if I had slipped, someone could have been seriously hurt. But once the adrenaline started to wear off, my whole body felt weak. I sat down, trying to calm my breathing, while they finally realized I wasn't laughing with them. The dog had woken up by then and was barking, confused and stressed by all the noise. After they left, the house felt even creepier than before. The laughter was gone, but the fear lingered. Every creak made me jump. Every shadow felt suspicious. I locked every door and checked every window at least twice. Sleeping that night was nearly impossible. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the image of those masks staring at me through the glass. Even though I knew who it was, my body didn't forget the fear. My heart would race every time I closed my eyes, and I slept in short, uneasy bursts, waking up at every sound. Years later, I can laugh about it a little. But the memory still makes my stomach twist. It taught me how real fear feels, how fast your body reacts before your mind can catch up, and how dangerous just a prank can actually be. Being alone in that house in the dark, with those masks at the door, was one of the most terrifying moments of my life. To this day, whenever I hear a house creak late at night or see someone standing too still outside a window, my mind goes right back to that moment. And no matter how many times I remind myself it was just my brother being an idiot, that first surge of fear never fully goes away. My father came back into my life after being gone for almost 3 years. I was 15 years old at the time, still a kid in so many ways, even though life had already forced me to grow up faster than I should have. I was home because I had just had my tonsils removed. My throat hurt, my body felt weak, and I was already emotionally worn down. I wasn't expecting anything unusual that day. I thought it would just be another quiet, uncomfortable recovery day. I was told my brother-in-law was coming by to bring some wood for a project. That was it. Nothing alarming, nothing emotional, just a normal visit. So when there was a knock on the door, I didn't hesitate. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to see. I opened the door, and my father was standing there. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 years. I knew he was an alcoholic. I knew he'd been gone. But nothing could have prepared me for how he looked. He didn't look like the man I remembered. He looked like someone who had been worn down by life to the point where there was almost nothing left inside him. His skin looked awful, dry and damaged, like it was peeling or falling apart. His head was almost completely bald, with that harsh, uneven look that comes from neglect rather than choice. His eyes were bloodshot, glassy, and hollow. When I looked into them, I didn't see warmth or relief or happiness. I saw regret. Deep, heavy regret. The kind that doesn't need words. He looked dead inside. I froze. I didn't know what to do. My brain didn't catch up to my body. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring at him, trying to process the fact that this broken version of a man was my father. He stepped inside. He was carrying 2 massive bags. As soon as he entered the house, the smell hit me. It was overwhelming. Those bags were filled with clothes that hadn't been washed in what looked like weeks, maybe longer. Clothes covered in dried vomit. Not fresh stains, but hardened, crusted layers that had been there for a long time. The smell was a mix of alcohol, rot, sweat, and something else I can't even properly describe. Have you ever gone a few days without showering and thought, wow, I feel disgusting? My father made that feeling look mild. He smelled worse than anything I had ever experienced. His socks were stiff with filth. When he took his shoes off, I saw pieces of skin that had fallen off into the fabric. It was horrifying. Not just physically, but emotionally. This wasn't just a man who needed help. This was a man who had completely given up on himself, and I was 15. We talked for a while. I don't even remember most of what was said. I think my brain was trying to protect me by blocking parts of it out. I offered him food because, honestly, I didn't know if he was homeless. I didn't know where he had been sleeping or how long it had been since he'd eaten properly. I was trying to do what I thought a decent human being should do, even though I was shaking inside. We hugged. I still remember that hug far too clearly. I remember how his beard felt against my face. It was rough, prickly, sharp, completely ungroomed. It scraped my skin. It smelled awful. He cried while we hugged, full-on crying. My father, this grown man who had disappeared from my life, all sobbing into me like I was supposed to comfort him. It felt wrong. It felt backwards. I was the child. He was the parent. And yet, in that moment, I was the one holding everything together while he fell apart. I remember thinking how pathetic it felt, how unfair it was that he came back looking for sympathy when I had just started healing from the damage he'd already done. I had just begun to move past my daddy issues, and there he was, ripping them back open. Then he said something I will never forget. He looked at me and said, "Neb, I'm going to call your mum. If I can't stay here, I will die." He said that directly to me, a 15-year-old. I felt my heart stop, not metaphorically. It was like my body shut down for a second. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know how to breathe. I didn't know how to exist in that moment. But he had just placed the weight of his life and death on my shoulders, and I wasn't even old enough to drive. What the fuck was I supposed to do with that? I gave him privacy to call my mum. I went upstairs and collapsed. I sobbed harder than I ever had before. It wasn't just fear. It was anger, confusion, guilt, exhaustion. I felt trapped. Like no matter what happened next, it would somehow be my fault. My sister called me. She said she was on her way home. That gave me some sense of grounding, like maybe an adult was finally coming to handle this. My dad called me back downstairs. When I came down, he was swishing mouthwash in his mouth, probably trying to hide the smell of beer, as if that could erase everything else, as if mouthwash could fix years of damage. Then somehow, things got even stranger. He decided it would be a good idea to teach me how to fight. There I was, 15 years old, weak from surgery, standing in my own home while my alcoholic father showed me how to hurt people. He explained how to kick someone's kneecap in, how to cause serious damage, how to hurt someone badly enough that they wouldn't get back up. It felt surreal, like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare. Once he was done, he went outside to smoke, as if everything was normal. My sister arrived not long after. She hugged me immediately. That hug felt different, safe, real. She didn't ask questions right away. She didn't pressure me. She just knew I needed to get out of there. She took me to her house while my mum and dad talked things out. I'm 16 now, and it still haunts me. I replay that day in my head more often than I'd like to admit. I think about his face, his smell, his words. I wonder if I could have done something differently, if I could have said something better, if I could have prevented what happened next, even though I know, logically, that none of it was my responsibility. The guilt still creeps in. That's the thing about manipulation. It plants seeds that don't just disappear. Sometimes I still feel angry. Sometimes I feel sad. Sometimes I feel numb. And sometimes I feel all of it at once. I hate that he put me in that position. I hate that he made me carry something no child should ever have to carry. I hate that his choices became scars in my life. And yes, I hate him for what he did to me and my mum. He didn't just show up broken. He broke something in me that day too. And that's something I'm still trying to heal from. It happened about 8 years ago, and even now I can picture the whole thing clearly, like my brain burned it in permanently. At the time, I had one of the worst cases of strep throat I've ever had in my life. I'm not exaggerating when I say it felt like my body was actively trying to shut down. My throat was on fire, swollen to the point where swallowing felt like dragging broken glass down my neck. Talking was nearly impossible. Even breathing felt uncomfortable. I wasn't thinking straight, barely eating, barely drinking, just trying to survive the day without passing out from exhaustion or pain. My wife could see how bad I was. That evening, she decided to take the kids out of the house for a few hours so I could rest properly. The house went quiet, in that way it only does when everyone leaves at once. No cartoons in the background, no kids running around, no doors opening and closing. Just silence. I took the medication I'd been prescribed, swallowed it slowly, grimacing the whole time, and crawled into bed. I remember thinking that sleep couldn't come fast enough. I don't know how long I was asleep before it happened. It couldn't have been more than an hour, maybe less. I was pulled out of sleep suddenly, not gently but sharply, by the sound of a male voice. At first, my half-asleep brain didn't register danger. It just felt wrong, out of place, like when you hear someone say your name, but no one should be there to say it. The voice was clear enough that it didn't sound like it was coming from the TV or outside. It sounded like it was inside my house. For a few seconds, I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it. My head was foggy from sickness and medication, and my body felt heavy, like it didn't want to cooperate. I told myself it had to be a dream, or maybe the meds were messing with my head. That thought lasted about 2 seconds, because then I heard the voice again, still talking, casual, like someone having a normal conversation in my living room. My heart rate spiked instantly. That jolt of adrenaline hit so hard, it cut straight through the fever and exhaustion. I forced myself upright in bed, my throat aching as I swallowed reflexively. I stood up and cracked my bedroom door open just enough to see down the hallway. The house lights were on in the living room. That alone was enough to make my stomach drop. I knew I had turned them off before going to bed. When I looked down the hallway toward the living room, I saw something that made my brain scream danger before I could consciously process it. My DVD player was sitting on the back of the couch, along with a stack of movies, not where they belonged, not where I had left them. Someone was moving my stuff. Someone was in my house. The voice kept going, calm, confident, like this person had every right to be there. At that point, all the sickness, all the weakness, all the confusion got shoved aside by pure instinct. I reached into the bedside drawer and grabbed my pistol. My hands were shaking, partly from fever and partly from adrenaline. I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel tough. I felt terrified and angry and protective all at once. My wife and kids weren't home, but this was still my house, and someone had crossed a line. I stepped into the hallway slowly, keeping close to the wall. Every sound amplified in my head. My bare feet felt cold against the floor. My breathing was shallow because deep breaths hurt my throat too much. With every step, my heart hammered harder. I kept expecting the voice to stop, like whoever it was had realized they weren't alone. But it didn't. He kept talking, completely unaware that I was moving closer. When I reached the end of the hallway, I took one more breath and stepped out into the living room, raising the gun and trying to do what I had always imagined I would do in a situation like this. I tried to yell for him to get on the ground. What actually came out of my mouth was nothing like a yell. Because of my throat, the sound was this horrible mix of a whisper, a cough, and a wheeze, all mashed together. It barely sounded human. It was weak and cracked and probably terrifying in its own way. Even to me, it sounded wrong. The guy holding the movies froze. Then everything happened at once. He dropped the stack of DVDs, which hit the floor with loud plastic clattering sounds that echoed through the room. His face went pale, his eyes went wide, and then he started yelling, loud and panicked, begging me not to shoot him. He was crying, shaking. I could see his legs trembling. And then, unmistakably, he pissed himself right there on my living room floor. Before I could even fully process what I was seeing, another scream cut through the room. A woman's scream, high-pitched, shocked, terrified. My sister-in-law came running out of our bathroom. The moment stretched in the strangest way. My brain was trying to catch up to reality, to reconcile the image of a stranger in my house with the sudden appearance of a family member who absolutely should not have been there. She was screaming his name, yelling that it was okay, that it was her boyfriend, that I was supposed to meet him a few days earlier. Everything came crashing down all at once. The gun lowered. My arms felt weak. The adrenaline that had been holding me upright drained out of me so fast I thought I might collapse. My throat burned as I tried to swallow again. The guy was still standing there, shaking, crying, and absolutely humiliated, his pants soaked. He kept apologizing over and over, his voice cracking just as badly as mine had moments earlier. It turned out my wife had told my sister and her boyfriend that they could borrow some movies while we were gone. Somewhere along the way, that message didn't make it to me. They thought the house would be empty. They thought it was safe. They didn't expect a half-delirious, armed, severely sick man to wake up and think his house was being robbed. My sister-in-law was apologizing profusely, trying to explain everything at once. The boyfriend looked like he'd just aged 10 years in the span of 30 seconds. I don't think I've ever seen fear like that on someone's face before or since. He genuinely thought he was about to die, and for a brief, terrifying moment, he almost did. When my wife got home later and heard the full story, the color drained from her face. She kept saying, oh my God," over and over again. Everyone agreed that it was a massive misunderstanding, but the weight of how badly it could have gone wrong hung in the air for a long time after that. I went back to bed that night shaking, throat still killing me, fever still raging, but now with an added layer of mental exhaustion. Sleep didn't come easily after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed it. The voice, the DVDs on the couch, the moment I stepped into the living room, the sound my own voice made when I tried to shout. How close everything came to ending in tragedy because of one missed conversation and one badly timed illness. Even now, years later, I think about it sometimes and feel that same tightness in my chest. It wasn't a ghost story or anything supernatural. It was just a perfect storm of bad timing, bad communication, and bad luck. But that doesn't make it any less terrifying. In fact, knowing how real and preventable it was almost makes it worse. That night taught me how fast life can flip from normal to dangerous without warning. How sickness can cloud your judgment. How fear can push you into situations you never thought you'd be in. And how easily a simple misunderstanding can turn into something irreversible. Every time I think about it, I'm grateful it ended the way it did. Embarrassing, shocking, traumatizing, sure. But everyone walked away alive, and sometimes that's the best ending you can hope for. I remember that night clearly, even though it feels like it happened a lifetime ago. I was in my apartment, completely alone with my newborn daughter. It had been one of those long, exhausting days where every small sound feels louder than it really is. Every shadow seems to twitch, and your mind refuses to stop racing. I was sitting on the couch trying to distract myself by watching TV while my daughter slept peacefully in her crib a few feet away. The soft glow from the screen painted the room in muted colors, and for a brief moment, everything felt calm. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It was huge, absolutely enormous. The shape of it moved so quickly that my brain barely had time to process before my heart was already hammering. It was a spider, or at least it looked like one. Not a small one. Not the kind that occasionally shows up around a window or in the bathroom. This thing was the size of my hand, sprawling across the wall and crawling toward the edge of my vision. I froze at first, the panic twisting in my chest, my stomach dropping. I live in Illinois, just south of Chicago. There are spiders around, sure, but nothing remotely close to the size of what I had just seen. I knew that. I knew it in the back of my mind, but my body didn't care about facts in that moment. I scrambled to my daughter's crib, adrenaline pumping through every vein in my body. I shut the door quickly, trying to make sure the crack underneath was blocked. My baby was completely unaware of the chaos, sleeping as innocently as possible while I frantically double-checked that the barrier was secure. Oh, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold her clothes as I dressed her, making sure she was bundled up and safe. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen as I dialed my husband, my voice trembling uncontrollably when he picked up. I saw a spider, I stammered. It's huge. Oh my God, it's coming. I could barely get the words out. My husband tried to calm me, but he didn't believe me. It's probably just a regular spider, he said, his tone gentle but dismissive. You're imagining it. Panic twisted into frustration, and I hung up, only to call my mom seconds later, hoping someone, anyone, would understand that this wasn't a joke. She didn't. I felt trapped, cornered in my own home with this impossible creature that wasn't supposed to exist. My heart was racing so fast, I thought I might pass out. In sheer desperation, I packed up my daughter and myself and drove an hour away to my mom's house. The drive was tense, every shadow on the road making me flinch, every passing car setting my nerves on edge. I kept looking at the rearview mirror to make sure nothing was following me, though I knew, logically, nothing was. My mind refused to listen to reason. When my husband finally came home, he tore the apartment apart, pulling cushions off the couch, checking corners and crevices, lifting rugs and peeking behind furniture. But there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. No spider. The apartment was empty and quiet, completely normal. But I couldn't calm down. I felt shaken to my core, my body still trembling from the fear, my mind replaying the image over and over like a horrifying film I couldn't pause. For months afterward, I avoided that corner of the apartment, triple-checked every shadow and movement, and flinched every time I caught even a glimpse of a fly or small bug. I felt embarrassed and almost guilty for overreacting, but at the same time, I couldn't shake that overwhelming sense of dread I had felt that night. It wasn't until about a year later, when I was taking a college course in psychology, that I learned something that made me feel both relieved and humiliated. The professor was discussing postpartum symptoms, the range of emotional and mental changes that can occur after giving birth. And then she mentioned hallucinations, seeing things that aren't there, perceiving movement or shapes that don't exist in reality. The recognition hit me like a lightning bolt. Everything suddenly made sense. My exhaustion, my heightened fear, or my constant vigilance. It had combined with my postpartum state to create a hallucination so vivid that my mind truly believed it was real. I felt incredibly stupid, even after all that time. How could I have been so convinced? How could my mind have tricked me so completely? But as I reflected on it, I realized it wasn't stupidity. It was the combination of sheer exhaustion, heightened anxiety, and the chemical changes my body was going through after giving birth. My mind had interpreted these factors in the only way it knew how, presenting a threat so immediate and terrifying that my body reacted with full-blown panic. Thinking back, it's almost surreal how real it felt. The size, the speed, the sheer terror. I can still remember the shape moving in my peripheral vision, the way my heart leapt in my chest, or the way my muscles tensed as if preparing to fight a real danger. It was such a convincing experience that for days afterward I questioned my perception, constantly glancing around the apartment, certain that I might see it again if I wasn't careful. Even though I know now that it wasn't real, the memory hasn't faded. Every time I see a spider, even a tiny one, my body reacts automatically, a faint echo of that terror still lodged in my nervous system. I've learned to laugh about it a little, though. It's ridiculous in retrospect how a hallucination could send me driving across the state with my baby, but it also reminds me how powerful the mind is and how quickly exhaustion and fear can override reason. That night taught me an important lesson about postpartum life, about the fragility of perception, and about the importance of self-care. I learned to give myself grace, to recognize when my mind was reaching its limits, and to trust that some of the things I feared weren't real, even if they felt undeniable in the moment. Even now, I sometimes think about that hand-sized spider and a shiver goes down my spine, not because it's real, there's nothing there, but because I know how completely my own brain managed to convince me of something that never existed. It's a humbling, frightening reminder of how much our minds can betray us when we are tired, vulnerable, and trying to care for another life at the same time. That night remains one of the most vivid memories of the early months with my daughter, not because of any danger in the physical world, but because of the absolute intensity of the fear I felt, and the way my body and mind reacted as if my life depended on it. And even though I know now that it was a hallucination, I will never forget it. Not the terror, not the frantic drive to my mom's, not the helpless shaking as I held my sleeping child close. It's a memory that stays with me, a lesson in how real fear can feel, even when the threat is entirely imagined. Even a year later, when I finally understood the science behind it, the memory still makes my heart race just slightly, reminding me that sometimes the scariest moments aren't caused by the world around us, but by the way our own minds interpret it. I am sorry for the interruption. I hate breaking the flow, but I am curious. Do you believe there is some truth to every story like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more, please subscribe. Okay, let's get back to it. I was around 12 years old when this happened. Maybe a little older, maybe a little younger. The exact age doesn't matter as much as how small and unprepared I felt at the time. I had been left home alone overnight, which already felt like a huge deal to me. I don't fully remember why my parents decided it was okay that night. I think they had an early meeting the next morning, something important that meant they had to leave before sunrise. The plan was simple, at least on paper. I would stay home by myself for the night, and my aunt would come pick me up early in the morning. At the time, I told myself I was grown enough to handle it. I didn't want to seem scared or immature. I nodded along when everything was explained, acting like it was no big deal. But once the house was quiet and the lights were off, reality set in. The house felt different without my parents in it. Every room seemed larger, darker, and emptier. Sounds that normally faded into the background suddenly felt sharp and threatening. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, even the wind outside made me tense. I tried to go to sleep like a normal night, but it didn't really work. I tossed and turned for hours. My mind kept drifting to worst-case scenarios without me even trying. What if someone broke in? What if there was a fire? What if I got sick and no one was there to help me? I kept checking the time, watching the glowing numbers on the clock slowly change. Every minute felt like 10. At some point, I must have drifted into a very light, restless sleep, the kind where you're never fully unconscious. Then, Sometime in the early morning hours, I heard it. A car pulling into the driveway. It was still dark outside, that weird time before dawn when the world feels suspended and unreal. I glanced at the clock and saw it was around 4 or 5 in the morning. My heart immediately jumped into my throat. I knew my aunt well, and one thing about her was consistent. She was always late. There was no chance she would be showing up early, especially not that early. The sound of tires crunching on the driveway sent a jolt of fear through my entire body. I sat up in bed, completely awake now. I listened as carefully as I could. The engine shut off. Then I heard a car door open and close. That sound alone made my stomach drop. Someone was outside my house. Someone wasn't supposed to be there. Panic took over. I jumped out of bed and started moving through the house as quietly and quickly as I could. And my bare feet felt cold against the floor as I checked each door, one by one. I made sure the back door was locked. I checked the sliding door. I checked the windows as best as I could. Every shadow felt like it was watching me. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure whoever was outside could hear it. Then I heard someone trying the front door. The handle rattled slightly, not violently, but enough to make it unmistakably clear that someone was attempting to get inside. My entire body went rigid. I stood there, frozen, staring at the door from across the room, barely breathing. When the door didn't open, there was a pause. Just a short one, but it felt endless. Then I heard footsteps moving away from the front of the house. I remember thinking, almost desperately, maybe they're leaving. Maybe they realize no one is home. And maybe this will just end here. But that hope didn't last long. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of the garage door opening. My heart sank even further. Whoever this was wasn't giving up. They were trying another way in. I crept toward the hallway, listening as hard as I could. I heard movement in the garage. Then I heard the door that connected the garage to the house being tested. The handle moved. Once, twice. Then there was the sound that truly terrified me. The sound of the lock being picked. At 12 years old, I didn't even know much about lock picking, but I knew what it sounded like when someone was trying to break in. There was no mistaking it. The seconds dragged on, painfully slow. My mind raced through every scary movie I'd ever seen, every warning my parents had ever given me. I felt completely helpless. I didn't know whether to hide, run, or scream. Then the door opened. Whoever it was had successfully unlocked it and stepped inside the house. I stood there in total shock, my body trembling, my thoughts completely scattered. I remember feeling like this was it, like something terrible was about to happen and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And then, just as suddenly as the fear had peaked, everything changed. I heard a familiar voice. It was my dad. He called my name casually, like this was the most normal thing in the world. I felt a strange mix of relief and confusion crash over me all at once. My legs felt weak as I stepped forward, still trying to process what was happening. He looked completely calm, like he hadn't just scared the life out of his 12-year-old child. It turned out he had forgotten something important at home. Instead of calling the house phone and risking waking me up, he decided to just drive back and quietly let himself in. He didn't think about how it might look or feel from my perspective. He didn't consider that a child home alone, hearing someone try multiple doors and then pick a lock, might assume the worst. Standing there, I didn't even know how to react. Part of me was angry. Part of me was embarrassed for being so scared. Mostly, I just felt drained. The adrenaline that had kept me upright drained out of my body all at once, leaving me shaky and exhausted. My dad laughed it off a bit, clearly not understanding the full impact of what he had just put me through. To him it was a simple mistake, a small inconvenience. To me, it was one of the most terrifying moments of my childhood. After he left again, I didn't sleep at all. There was no chance of that happening. I sat on my bed with the lights on, waiting for the sun to come up. When my aunt finally arrived later that morning, I was emotionally wrecked and physically exhausted. I didn't even know how to explain what had happened without sounding dramatic, but inside I knew that my fear had been real, justified, and overwhelming. Looking back now as an adult, I understand that my dad never meant to scare me. He wasn't trying to be cruel or careless, but understanding the intent doesn't erase the memory. That night taught me something very early about how vulnerable you feel when you're alone, and how quickly a normal situation can turn into something terrifying just because of missing information. Even now, years later, certain sounds still get to me. A car pulling into a driveway late at night, the rattle of a door handle, the sound of footsteps when I'm not expecting anyone. My body reacts before my mind can catch up. My heart speeds up, my muscles tense, and for a split second, I'm 12 again, standing in the dark, convinced someone is breaking into my house. It's strange how moments like that stick with you. At the time, it was brushed off as nothing more than a misunderstanding. But fear doesn't work that way. Fear remembers. Fear stores details. And even when logic tells you that everything is fine, your body doesn't always listen. That night didn't involve anything supernatural. There were no ghosts, no monsters, no strangers with bad intentions. It was just bad timing, poor communication, and a scared kid left alone too early in the morning. But that didn't make it any less real or any less frightening. Sometimes the scariest moments of our lives come from completely ordinary situations, twisted just enough to make us feel unsafe. And for me, that early morning, standing in my house while someone quietly broke in, will always be one of those moments I never fully forget. This happened around 2011, during a strange and exciting period of my life when I was young enough to believe I could just take off and figure everything out as I went. I had just finished high school and didn't feel ready to settle into anything permanent. I wanted distance, independence, and the feeling that I was doing something bold with my life. So I packed up what little I had and moved to Nova Scotia on my own, mostly just for the adventure of it. At the time, I didn't have much, but I didn't need much either. I rented a small place, lived simply, and enjoyed the feeling of being somewhere new where no one really knew me. There was a sense of freedom in that. Even when things were lonely or uncomfortable, I was young, stubborn, and convinced that whatever happened, I'd handle it. One of the few things I truly loved about that place was my bed. It was a solid wood frame bed, simple but sturdy, and for some reason it was the most comfortable bed I had ever slept on. I slept deeply on that thing. The kind of sleep where you close your eyes and the next thing you know, hours have passed without a single dream or memory in between. I used to joke that once I was asleep, nothing short of an earthquake could wake me. That's why what happened one night caught me completely off guard. I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. Not gradually, not groggy in a normal way, but abruptly, like something had yanked me out of sleep without warning. The room was dark and quiet, the kind of quiet you only notice when you're half awake and everything feels slightly unreal. And the first thing I became aware of was a pressure on my chest. It wasn't sharp pain. It wasn't crushing. It was more like something solid was sitting on me. The weight felt oddly familiar, almost harmless at first. My sleepy brain immediately tried to explain it away in the laziest way possible. It felt like a cat had curled up on my chest, or like a heavy book had been placed there while I slept. The strange thing was, I didn't own a cat, but in that half-asleep state, logic wasn't really in charge. I didn't sit up, I didn't panic, I didn't even open my eyes right away. All I felt was annoyance. I was comfortable, warm, and deeply tired, and something was in the way of that comfort. I just wanted it gone. So without really thinking, I reached up and grabbed whatever was sitting on my chest. fully intending to toss it aside and go right back to sleep. I didn't care what it was. My only goal was to remove the weight and sink back into unconsciousness. I grabbed it and threw it to the side, and immediately it slammed right back into my chest. That was the moment everything changed. My brain snapped awake in an instant. The confusion hit first, followed almost immediately by pure fear. Whatever this thing was, it had just come back on its own. It wasn't passive. It wasn't an object. It reacted. My heart started racing. I grabbed it again, harder this time, and flung it away with more force. I remember the motion being clumsy and desperate, like my body was moving faster than my thoughts could keep up. Again, it came right back and hit me square in the chest. That's when I fully freaked out. The fear was instant and overwhelming. My mind went blank, except for one screaming thought. Something is on me, and I can't get it off. My breathing became shallow and fast. My chest felt tight. My body flooded with adrenaline so suddenly it felt like electricity running through my veins. I didn't stop to think about what it could be. I didn't consider rational explanations. My body had already decided this was a threat, and it reacted accordingly. I panicked so hard that I practically launched myself off the bed. I don't even remember consciously jumping. It was like my muscles fired all at once in blind terror. I shot upward, levitating for a brief, surreal moment before gravity took over and slammed me back down onto the mattress. The bed couldn't handle it. The wooden frame beneath me cracked loudly, splintering under the force. Two of the support beams snapped, sending the mattress dipping unevenly beneath my weight. The sound of breaking wood only added to the chaos in my head, reinforcing the feeling that everything was spiraling out of control. But I didn't stop. I was fully in fight mode now. I kept grabbing this thing and throwing it off me over and over again, my movements frantic and uncoordinated. Every time I thought I had gotten rid of it, it came right back and smacked into my chest again. The repetition made it worse. It felt relentless, like being attacked by something I couldn't see, couldn't understand, and couldn't escape. My thoughts were a mess. What is this? Why won't it stay away? Am I dreaming? Am I dying? The room felt unreal, like I was trapped in some nightmare where the rules didn't make sense. And my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My breathing was ragged. I was sweating, shaking, and completely convinced that something was seriously wrong. This went on for what felt like forever. In reality, it was probably no more than 10 seconds. But fear stretches time in a strange way. Those seconds felt long, heavy, and endless. Each moment dragged, filled with panic and confusion. And then, slowly, something clicked. In the middle of the chaos, my brain finally caught up with my body. A small, rational thought pushed its way through the fear. The thing I was grabbing felt familiar, not just in weight but in shape, in movement, in resistance. There was something oddly consistent about it, something that didn't quite match the idea of an external threat. I paused for half a second, and that's when I realized the horrifying, ridiculous truth. It was my own arm. I had been sleeping on it in a weird position, probably elevated or compressed in a way that completely cut off circulation. My entire arm was numb, dead weight, totally asleep. I couldn't feel it. I couldn't control it. When I grabbed it, it didn't respond the way my brain expected it to, because it wasn't sending any signals back. Every time I threw it aside, gravity and momentum brought it right back onto my chest. I had been fighting myself. The realization didn't bring immediate relief. At first, it was almost worse. My arm felt foreign, disconnected, like it didn't belong to me at all. I stared at it in the dim light, flexing my fingers and waiting for sensation to return, my heart still racing from the adrenaline dump. Slowly, pins and needles crept back in. That awful tingling sensation spread through my arm as blood flow returned. painful but reassuring. With it came the ability to move, to feel, to recognize it as part of my own body again. Only then did the panic start to fade. Once I fully understood what had happened, embarrassment crept in alongside relief. I sat there in the broken bed, breathing heavily, surrounded by the aftermath of my own fear, and couldn't help but think about how ridiculous it must have looked from the outside. An imaginary observer would have seen a grown adult wake up in the middle of the night, violently flailing, throwing his own arm around like it was an enemy, screaming internally, smashing his bed frame, and having a complete meltdown over his own numb limb. It would have been hilarious. But in the moment, it had been absolutely terrifying. Even now, I can still remember how real the fear felt, how convinced I was that something was attacking me, how quickly my body reacted without waiting for logic to catch up. It was a reminder of how powerful the mind can be when it's caught between sleep and wakefulness, how easily perception can twist reality into something frightening. That night stuck with me, not because it was supernatural or mysterious or dangerous in any lasting way, but because it showed me how thin the line is between calm and panic. 1 second I was deeply asleep, completely at peace. The next I was convinced I was under attack, my body reacting with full force. It was horrifying at the time. And later, once my heart rate returned to normal and I could laugh at myself, it became one of those stories I tell with a mix of disbelief and amusement. A reminder that sometimes the scariest experiences don't come from outside threats at all, but from our own bodies betraying us in the strangest ways. Still, every now and then, when I wake up in the middle of the night and feel something heavy on my chest, I make damn sure it's actually supposed to be there before I start throwing punches. This happened when I was younger, during a time in my life that already felt heavy and uncertain. My dad had been diagnosed with cancer, and everything about our household changed almost overnight. Hospitals became part of our routine. Long drives, quiet phone calls, whispered conversations, and that constant feeling of waiting for news that might change everything. Because of his treatment, my dad spent a lot of time in the hospital, and my parents were stretched thin, emotionally and physically. That meant I was home alone, more often than I had ever been before. I tried to act like I was fine with it. I told myself I was mature enough, responsible enough, old enough to handle it. But the truth was, the house felt different when my parents weren't there. It felt bigger, quieter. Every sound stood out more. Every shadow seemed darker. I was already on edge most days, worried about my dad, worried about my mum, worried about things I didn't even fully understand yet. On this particular day, I was doing my homework at home like I had done many times before. My toddler sister was there with me, too young to understand why things felt strange or why our routine had changed. Our dogs were nearby, drifting in and out of sleep, completely unaware of the weight hanging over the house. For a while, everything felt normal. Then I heard a noise outside. At first, it was just a faint buzzing sound, low and steady. I remember pausing mid-sentence in my homework, my pencil hovering above the paper as I tried to figure out what I was hearing. The noise didn't belong to the house. It wasn't the dishwasher or the air conditioner or anything familiar. The buzzing got louder. Curious and a little uneasy, I got up and looked out the window. That's when I saw him. There was a large, bald man walking toward our house. He was wearing cut-off shorts, a baseball cap pulled low, and sunglasses that completely hid his eyes. In one hand, he was holding a weed whacker, and in the other, a pair of shears. He wasn't waving. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't calling out. He was just walking straight toward the house with yard tools in his hands. My brain immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion. I didn't think, oh, maybe this is a landscaper. I didn't think, Maybe someone made a mistake. All I could think was that a strange man was approaching my house while I was home alone with my little sister. Fear hit me like a wave. My heart started racing so hard it felt like it was shaking my chest. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. I remember thinking very clearly that something bad was about to happen. The combination of everything I was already dealing with, my dad being sick, being alone so often, and now this, made my fear feel overwhelming. I practically panicked. I grabbed my toddler sister as quickly and carefully as I could, called the dogs to follow me, and ran straight to the basement. I didn't stop to think. I didn't stop to listen. I just knew I needed to get us somewhere hidden and safe. We shut ourselves in the basement, surrounded by concrete walls and dim light. I sat on the floor, holding my sister close. My dogs pressed against us like they knew something was wrong. I started crying almost immediately, my thoughts spinning so fast I could barely keep up with them. What if he tries to break in? What if he hurts us? What if I can't protect my sister? I tried to breathe. I tried to calm myself down. But all I could picture was that man walking closer to the house, tools in his hands, the buzzing sound still echoing in my ears. I knew I had to do something. Shaking, I grabbed the phone and called 911. My voice cracked as soon as the operator answered. I tried to explain that I was home alone, that there was a strange man outside with tools, that my dad was sick, that I didn't know what to do. I'm sure I sounded panicked and scattered, but the operator stayed calm and told me help was on the way. Those minutes waiting felt endless. Every sound made me jump. Every creak in the house made my heart race faster. My dogs stayed alert, ears perked, ready to react. My sister didn't understand what was happening, but she could feel my fear. And that made everything harder. Eventually, I heard sirens. Relief washed over me so hard it made me dizzy. 2 police officers arrived. One of them came down to the basement to get me and my sister, speaking gently, telling me we were safe now. The other officer stayed outside to talk to the man. As we came back upstairs and stepped outside, my fear slowly started to shift into confusion. The man was standing calmly with the officer, his tools resting on the ground. He didn't look angry. He didn't look threatening. He looked familiar. And then it hit me. He wasn't a stranger. He was one of my parents' best friends. The realization made my face burn with embarrassment. This wasn't some random man with bad intentions. He had come over to help. Knowing my dad was sick and unable to take care of the yard, he had shown up to mow the lawn and trim things without being asked, just to support our family. I felt horrible. The officers explained what had happened, and to my surprise, they weren't upset at all. If anything, they seemed amused. They told me I did the right thing, that calling 911 when you feel unsafe is exactly what you're supposed to do. They did ask me to call my parents to confirm that they knew the man, just to be sure everything checked out. When I talked to my parents, they reassured everyone that yes, he was a close family friend, and yes, he had come to help out. I couldn't stop apologizing. I apologized to the officers. I apologized to my parents. I apologized to the man himself over and over again, my voice full of embarrassment and guilt. I felt like I had wasted everyone's time and caused unnecessary trouble. But he just laughed. He told me he was glad I called for help. He said it showed that I knew what to do in an emergency, that I was protecting my sister, and that I had handled the situation the right way, even if it turned out to be a misunderstanding. He wasn't offended at all. If anything, he seemed proud of me. That stuck with me. At the time, I felt embarrassed beyond words. But looking back now, I understand something I didn't fully grasp then. I was a kid dealing with fear, responsibility, and stress far beyond my years. I was home alone during a frightening chapter in my family's life, and I reacted the only way I knew how. And I did the right thing. That day taught me that trusting your instincts matters, especially when you're responsible for someone else. It taught me that asking for help isn't wrong, even if it turns out everything is okay. And it taught me that sometimes fear doesn't mean you failed. It means you cared enough to act. Even now, I can still remember the buzzing sound, the sight of that man walking toward the house, and the way my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. But I also remember the relief of hearing sirens, the kindness of the officers, and the understanding of a friend who knew I was just trying to keep my family safe. It was terrifying in the moment, embarrassing afterward, but in the end, it became one of those experiences that quietly shaped who I am and how I respond when things don't feel right. And honestly, I'd rather be embarrassed than sorry. I was 15 at the time, and it was just a normal weekend. My parents were on vacation, so I was home alone, enjoying the peace of an empty house. It was late at night, and I was watching TV in the living room. Everything felt calm, the kind of quiet that makes even small sounds feel louder than usual. I was fully relaxed, half watching the show and half dozing off, when I noticed movement in the corner of my eye. My attention snapped immediately, and I turned to look through the window. What I saw stopped me cold. At first, I thought it was a bear, but this wasn't just a bear standing on all fours like the ones you see in documentaries. No, this creature was on its hind legs. It had the general shape and posture of a human standing upright, but covered in thick, dark fur. Its head looked like a bear's, rounded snout, with small ears, but the way it moved, the way it carried itself, felt almost human. For a terrifying moment, I froze in place. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly. I didn't know whether to run or just stay absolutely still, hoping it wouldn't notice me. My brain was racing, trying to figure out if what I was seeing was real or some trick of my mind. I could only stare, my eyes locked on this figure. It wasn't making any sound, but its presence was enough to send chills straight through me. The creature seemed just as surprised to see me as I was to see it. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, but looking back, I realized it was probably no more than 8 seconds. 8 seconds of staring at something that shouldn't exist. Then, as if nothing had happened, it turned and casually walked or strutted on its hind legs toward the neighbor's backyard. Its gait was almost effortless, smooth and confident, like it knew exactly what it was doing. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I ran upstairs to my bedroom and dragged an armchair in front of the stairwell, blocking it completely. Every sound from the house or outside felt amplified, every rustle of leaves or distant bark of a dog making me flinch. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called my parents, trying to explain what I had just seen. At first, they didn't believe me. They assumed maybe I'd seen a bear that had escaped from somewhere, a plausible enough story even though we live in the Netherlands, a country where wild bears don't exist. But they could also tell when I wasn't exaggerating or making something up. My voice had the raw fear in it, the kind you can't fake. After a long discussion over the phone, they agreed to cut their vacation short and come home. Once they arrived, they called the local police to report the incident. I insisted over and over that this wasn't a normal bear. It wasn't like any bear I'd ever seen in pictures or on TV. The police were polite, but didn't seem to take the not normal part seriously. They said they'd investigate and get back to us, but, unsurprisingly, we never heard from them again. That night, and for many nights afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. I'd lie in bed, every sound making me jump, my mind replaying the image of that figure, every creak in the house. Every shadow cast by the moonlight felt like it could be that same creature. It took nearly 2 months before I could sleep through the night again without using some kind of medication to calm myself down. Even now, years later, thinking about it still sends a shiver down my spine. The rational part of my brain says it had to be something explainable, a wild animal, a person in a bear suit, some sort of hallucination. But the memory is so vivid, so precise, that it's hard to reconcile it with anything normal. The thing was enormous. I'm about 182 centimeters tall, and this figure must have been 2 heads taller than me. Its long legs looked human in proportion, but the arms, or front legs, ended around its hips, and the claws on its hands were unmistakable. I've seen black bears in photos and documentaries, and it didn't look like any of them. The proportions were all wrong, too long in the limbs, too upright, too confident in its movements. What's even more baffling is that there have been no other sightings in my area, which is densely populated. The Netherlands tracks wildlife meticulously. Wolves, foxes, birds, you name it. People notice and report them. There's no way something that size could have moved around unnoticed, and yet I've never heard of anyone else seeing anything like it. That makes me even more uneasy. Sometimes I try to rationalize it. Maybe it was an escaped exotic animal, some kind of experimental zoo creature that got loose. But then, why hasn't it appeared anywhere else? Maybe it was a prankster in a bear suit, someone tall and lanky. But the claws, the size, the way it moved, it was far beyond what a human could manage. I replay the 8 seconds constantly in my mind, the way it paused, the way its head seemed to study me, and the slow, almost deliberate way it walked away on its hind legs. It's burned into my memory. I can't explain why it felt so aware, so intelligent, like it wasn't just an animal acting on instinct. The fear wasn't just from seeing something big and strange. It was the feeling that it was observing me in a way that no ordinary creature would. Over the years, I've tried to tell myself it must have been some kind of hallucination, a trick of shadows and my imagination fueled by being alone late at night. But my parents, the police report, and the vividness of the memory itself make that hard to fully accept. I've never been one to see things that aren't there. I'm rational, grounded. But there's a part of me that knows that whatever I saw that night, it wasn't normal. Even now, when I walk past windows at night or hear movement outside, my chest tightens. I catch myself imagining it there, standing upright in someone else's backyard, silently watching. I wonder if it will ever come back. Whether it was some freak incident, a lost exotic animal, or something that defies explanation, it left a mark on me that hasn't faded. The fear wasn't just about danger, it was about the unknown, about realizing that there are things in the world that don't fit into our neat little categories, things that can appear suddenly, silently, and vanish just as quickly, leaving you questioning what you know about reality. That one night changed the way I perceive the world. Even now, years later, it terrifies me to remember that 8-second encounter, the moment where something completely impossible stood on its hind legs and stared at me before walking casually out of sight. I've told this story to friends and family countless times, but no one really gets it. Everyone wants to chalk it up to an escaped bear, or a joke, or hallucination. But I know what I saw. I remember the way its eyes glimmered in the darkness, the way its claws glinted in the faint light, the way its movements were deliberate, unnervingly intelligent. The Netherlands is a safe, predictable place, but that night reminded me that sometimes the world isn't as safe as we think. And even after all these years, I can still feel that fear, sharp and real, whenever I close my eyes and think about what I saw. The story ends here. If this one stayed with you, please leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe so you are here for the next one. Until then, stay safe.